Good afternoon. It's good to see you all again, so bright and spry and wide awake. Many of you I last saw roughly 2 weeks ago at the informal council in Prague, and some of you I saw earlier this morning at around 2 o'clock. This has been a good European Council. 24 intense and constructive hours, 24 hours of hard work, after which I'm in a position to say that Europe stands together. We stand together at the side of Ukraine. We stand together in the face of the aggression of President Putin. We stand together in trying to tackle and address the consequences of Russia's war of aggression, such as the rise in energy prices. Our joint and common objective is to lower energy prices and to secure energy supply. And we've made quite some progress in that regard during our meeting here, although there may have been before the meeting some prophecies of doom. The energy ministers now have a precise framework for their discussions on Tuesday, where they can discuss the details, and I hope they will be successful in doing so, because otherwise it will be placed before us once again. As concerns joint purchasing of gas, we've made headway too on this regard. Private companies are now in a position to group together for the purpose of joint purchasing. That's a good step forward. We will amend the competition law regulations required. The Commission has already proposed or submitted a good proposal in that regard. We also want to address joint purchasing for a certain percentage of the gas that is to go into our gas storage facilities, as suggested and proposed by the European Commission. And it would be good, and it is good, that we are coordinating at an early point in time in order to prepare for the winter 2023. As we've now experienced, it's not always that easy to achieve this kind of step if the coordination isn't sufficient to also cover the spikes, which we want to avoid. The same is also true for the way in which we can address this. We have the so-called Trading Hub Europe in Germany, and we've made good experiences in that regard, which we're happy to make available to all our colleagues and counterparts. We also decided at my initiative to more speedily expand renewables and to also speed up the necessary planning procedures. It has been proposed that this ought to take place on the basis of a decision to be taken speedily in order to avoid any slowdowns. This has been very important to me. We already have existing production capacities for electricity using renewable energy sources that are not being used because the grids had not been sufficiently expanded. Once the necessary planning procedures have been set in motion, the actual implementation will not take up a lot of time. So it would constitute a major step forward if we were to succeed in achieving this. We also agreed that we want to intensify our talks with reliable suppliers such as Norway and the United States, but also with other suppliers in order to ensure the prices go down on a general basis. We will also use the format of the G7 and the G20 to talk to other consumer countries, important countries like, for example, Japan or South Korea, and to advance the coordination with them, also with those countries that are on the supply side of things. We also want to tackle short-term spikes and wild speculation on the gas markets. We've taken a good decision in that regard. Great literature, when I look at the English text, I have to say it is about limiting episodes of excessive gas prices, and that is exactly our objective. This is what we want to achieve. You know, some of these spikes are only there for a couple of hours on one trading day, and are to be traced back to mere speculation, but they can drive up prices to quite some extent. And we have submitted proposals on how we can make progress in tackling these issues. Quite some technical work will have to go into this, but this will be the task of the experts. They will address the details. But it would be very good if we were able to drive out of the price formation process that element of speculation, and we reached agreement in that regard. We also took a closer look at the so-called Iberian model, the Iberian Peninsula being still somewhat separate from the European structures and grids. A whole number of questions have been asked in that regard. We've listened to some answers. We will continue to examine the matter, which is a good thing. We also looked at the financial side of matters. We have immense opportunities offered to us through the Recovery Fund, which is about to reach the investment stage now, at a point in time where the pandemic has almost neared its end, so we can draw on the funds available there. The finance ministers also ensured the funding of the Repower EU program, which is a program that amounts to roughly 250 billion euros, which is designed or designated to expand renewable energies and thus can help us become even more independent from energy supplies from Russia. This is actually a practical expression of European solidarity. We also talked, of course, about our global competitiveness. It will continue to be on the agenda of the European Council. We will have to take a closer look at economic developments in that regard, and we will have to also focus on national European demands. China also figured quite prominently in our discussions today, and that has been a good thing when you take a look at what the outcome is. Usually it's a sentence that says we've talked about it, but I think that was exactly the right thing to do. It provided us with an opportunity to talk in greater detail and in a very constructive spirit about these issues. And it has been possible for us to listen to one another, to exchange views on the subject matter. And one can say that the European Union takes pride in the fact that it is a union that has an interest in global trade. It is not on the side of those that speak out in favor of deglobalization. On the other hand, it's also clear that we have to ensure our sovereignty, our ability to produce important technologies that play a part in our economies. So modern technologies like AI, quantum computers, the production of batteries, the space, and how things are going to evolve in that regard. These are all matters that prey on our minds. It's a question of supply chains. It's about commodities and raw materials. We have to diversify. As I said, we're talking a big world here. There are many countries on our globe, so this is also part of our considerations. Of course, and this is right so, that the point of departure was the rising energy prices. Russia's war of aggression, which is behind this rise in prices, figured very prominently in our debates and took up much of our time. We continue to support cooperation to defend Ukraine in many different ways, also by making available weapons. Yesterday, President Zelensky joined us by video link and reported in very haunting language about the recent developments there and the attacks by Russia on electricity plants and on other civilian infrastructure in Ukraine. The air defense thus plays an important part for the people in Kyiv, in Odessa and in other cities, because they have to be protected against Russia's attack from the air and with the help of drones. President Zelensky highlighted Germany's support in this regard. We provided a very modern air defense system to Ukraine last week. We've already provided Ukraine with, for example, the provision of Cheetah tanks, the so-called Gepard. To be very clear, targeted attacks on civilian population constitute war crimes. One has to be very clear in that regard, and this is why we imposed another series of sanctions against senior military leaders of Iran and arms businesses that support the Russian army by selling drones to them. This week, we also made available another 500 million euros in the framework of the European Peace Facility for Ukraine, and we also agreed to set up an EU training mission for Ukrainian soldiers. Germany stands ready to support this endeavour by making available one headquarter of two. These are all important and concrete expressions of European solidarity with the people of Ukraine. We will continue to discuss further financial support for Ukraine. This year's demand of Ukraine seems to be, and I'm basing this on information of the IMF, seems to be covered. We have made a contribution towards this being the case by making available billions of euros. When we look to next year and financial support for Ukraine, we aim to develop an overall approach with our partners and the United States. I briefed my colleagues with the President of the Commission on the upcoming conference of experts on the reconstruction of Ukraine, which will take place in Berlin on the 25th of October. We're still coordinating with Ukraine in that regard. And finally, at the end of our discussions, we also briefly touched upon the preparation for COP27 in Egypt in November and the upcoming EU-ASEAN summit in Brussels in December. Now, in a nutshell, we are talking 27 countries. 27 countries with different histories and different backgrounds. We may have different interests on certain issues. Nevertheless, we stand united as the European Union, as has become clear during our meeting here. We are talking a good European capable of taking action in times of crises. Thank you.